Okay, so this time I'll be showing you how to create a bootleg, and a bootleg is different than an edit or a mashup because you're essentially trying to remix somebody else's track using more than just editing and moving some stuff around. And it's different than a remix because when you're doing a remix, you essentially should have the stems, which is the individual pieces that make up the whole song. And so when you do an actual remix, you'll have the stems, but when you're doing a bootleg, you're essentially just taking somebody else's song and you're adding to it in a way and you're changing it in a way that you're remixing it now by adding other sounds and samples and different things. But in this case, you don't have the individual parts that make up the whole song. So these are the steps we're going to be taking to create a bootleg. All right. And the first thing again was we're going to find a song that we want to use. And we're going to import the song and find the tempo and time stretch it to make sure that it fits on the grid. And then what we're going to do is we're going to change it slightly. We might use a different tempo than the original just to make it sound different. And then we're going to add some drums using maybe a different drum pattern to really change up the sound of it. And then we might chop and arrange kind of like what we did with the edit and the mashups. And then we're going to add a lead synth or some kind of synth sound, some extra sounds in there. And then we can also mix the levels and finish it up and export the track so we have a bootleg. All right, so in this session, I have 2 tracks right now just to show you a couple of options that you have when it comes to creating bootlegs. Now, one thing you can do is you can take a slow track or something that doesn't sound very dancey and turn it into a dance track like what I have here. So this particular track right here is a song called Here, and it's off of an album by a guy by the name of Murs, M-U-R-S. And I'll turn off warp so you can hear it without anything going on there.
We were gonna be something. We were gonna be stars. We were gonna be on one. We were gonna be guys.
All right, so you can hear it's just a really chilled out kind of hip hop track, and it's not very dancey. The other option is to take something that is more of a dance track and turn it into something a little more down tempo. So I have this deadmau5 track here called Suckfest 9001, and I'll turn off warp so that you can hear what it sounds like in its original kind of form without the tempo change. All right, so you can hear we have more of a dancey track. And so what we can do is we can take this and we can slow it down and make it something a little bit more chilled out, or we can take this here track and take it and make it something a little more dancey. Now, my suggestion to you is to grab something that you enjoy listening to. I grabbed this here song because it's on this Murs album that I actually enjoy listening to. You can listen to the track and play around with it once you get it into the session and just if you're not really sure if it'll sound better with the dance vibe or something, or if it'll sound better slow down, then you can play around with it in the session. So you can get it warped and locked on the grid, and then you can play with the tempo here and speed it up and slow it down and see where, see how it sounds. So because I've done this multiple times, I kind of can already hear where it might sound good or what might sound good for this track. So this one, I feel like this here track might sound good with a dancier kind of vibe. And I could hear in this deadmau5 track where we could slow it down and kind of switch it up there too. So I'm going to start off with this Murs track and see kind of where we can take that. So I'll just mute this this deadmau5 one for now. And so Ableton says that it thinks that this track is about 125 beats per minute. And so what I'll do is I'll turn on the warp and I'll see where it dropped that first warp marker. So Ableton put the warp marker before the music starts. So it kind of actually starts here. So I'm going to move this up and see if that's right. So I know that's good. And then I'll right click and set 1-1 here. And then what we'll do is make sure that it's on time with the warp. So I'm going to switch this to 125 beats per minute for now. So I'm just changing the global tempo, and then we'll see I have the metronome on so I can listen to see if it stays in time or if I need to warp it a little better. It definitely does get off time. Maybe I think around here is where it starts to get off. And it's kind of hard with a sound like this. It's actually more of a triplet feel. Ba-da-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da-da. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's helpful to understand rhythmic timing and a little bit of music theory here, so that way you can know where this next downbeat comes in, especially if it's a triplet kind of a feel, where triplet is just 3 notes for every quarter note. So for every metronome hit that you hear, that bing, 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 then you're going to hear 3 notes. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So that comes in about there. I'm gonna roughly do this, and then I can tighten it up once I know where that first downbeat of this is. So this might be actually the first downbeat there. So let's see what that sounds like.
Something.
Yeah. So these are the actual downbeats. And so now if I stretch this one to the proper mark, then I can delete these, and all this other stuff should be on time.
We were gonna be something. We were gonna be stars.
All right, you can see it starts to get ahead of the time. So this is really nice. We have really big transients here that's going to help us with getting this on time. So we just move this. It's all right on the downbeat, on the quarter note.
Something. We were gonna be stars. We were gonna be on one.
All right, so it gets off again there.
On one. We were gonna be guys. We were gonna be someone.
And a really useful technique too is, now that we've kind of got some of these going, what we can do is right click and go warp from here, 125 BPM from here. And now that it knows the tempo and it sees what we've been doing with this, it should do a little bit better job of warping the rest of this track. So now that we've clicked in, hit warp from here, it should be a little more on time.
But we didn't know who. We were gonna be reckless. We had nothing to lose. But we never belonged here.
All right, so it's staying in time a lot better now. All right, so we don't have to keep going through here and dropping warp markers the entire time. So that's one way to kind of speed things up too, is little tricks like that, where now we have this timed in a little bit better. So we can go a little further in the track and see if it's still on time.
Now I try drinking and smoking, wishing and dreaming and hoping that I could be one of the chosen. Why can't they see that I'm lonely?
All right, and it sounds kind of warbly and a little weird, and that's because we're on this beats warping mode. So what we can do is we can switch that from beats to complex, and it'll sound a little bit smoother.
A square peg, a cracked egg, lost in my school zone. Now I try drinking and smoking.
All right, cool. So that sounds a lot better. And we can keep this at 125, and we can start to turn this into a dance track by grabbing some kick drums. We can stay away from like MIDI notes and MIDI instruments and stuff for the time being, and we can start with something simple as a 4 to the floor kind of kick sound. So if we go into samples here and we search for kick, we can see what kind of kicks we have to add into this track. And let's just grab this guy for now. So what I'm going to do is Command T to create a new audio track. And I'm going to just drag this kick into that audio track. All right. And I'll start it here where we've got the beat actually starting. And I can take this now with the grid. Right. Remember, we have it. This is set to an adaptive grid, so it changes as I zoom in more. And if that's confusing for you, you can always set it to a quarter note. And so now we can take this kick and just duplicate it for every quarter note, right?
Something.
All right. And then we can select all those and duplicate those and just duplicate that out a few times. There we go. And then now we've got a looped section.
Something. We were gonna be stars. We were gonna be on one. We were gonna be guys. We were gonna be someone.
All right, so I'll loop that for now just so we can have that section kind of going. And what we can also do is to add a compressor. All right, so if we add in just a basic compressor here, and we are going to add the compressor onto onto the actual hear track. And what we want to do is we want to get the track out of the way of the kick a little bit so we can hear more of the kick. And I'll hit this little triangle and we hit sidechain. And now what sidechaining is, this is a mixing technique used in a very creative way for dance music. And we'll say input is going to be to audio. So let me rename this so you can see what this is. So I'm going to rename to audio to kick. And then I'll go back to this track and I'm going to put on, set it so the input is coming from the kick, right? And so every time the kick makes a noise, this compressor is gonna hear that noise, and then it's actually going to turn down the volume of this track that we put the compressor on. So I'll turn up the ratio here and make it a faster attack so the compressor works faster. And then we'll change the threshold now so that it actually starts to work. So you can hear that as that kick is going, it's turning down the volume on this track a whole lot. We can make a faster release, so it gives us more of that pumping, breathing kind of sound. All right, and that's just to show you that it's working. All right, so now we can back it off a bit. We were gonna be stars. We were gonna be on one. All right, so now we have our kick sound, and it's kind of we can hear more of the kick, because without this, we don't hear as much of the kick because of all the sub bass in this track. We were gonna be stars. We were gonna be on one. All right, so we can use this more or less. However much more we want to hear that compression, we can turn this threshold down more to get more of that. Okay, so now that we've got it worked out so that we can hear more of the kick in there, what I've done was I've gone in and looked for a few more new kicks, because I'm not a huge fan of that kick sound that we're using right now. I think it's important to really pick a good sound to begin with, but you don't want to spend all of your time looking for a sound. There's a 5-minute rule that I like to use, and if you can't find or create the sound that you're looking for within 5 minutes, then it's time to just move on and kind of keep going. So what I did was, over here I grabbed a bunch of different kicks and was testing them out inside of the track to see what I thought would sound best. And remember, that 5-minute rule isn't like a hard set 5 minutes. It's really just a guideline. So if you're looking for a sound or trying to create a sound and it's taking you out of the creative vibe, then you would just want to stick within the creative vibe and just kind of work with what you've got. And you can always replace the sounds later. All right, so if I just use Command L, if I select these kicks, these are the 4 different kinds of kicks that I went through. And if I hit Command L, I can loop that. And these are the different kicks that I kind of picked out and thought, wanted to test with the track to see what it sounded like. All right, so I have the original kick in there with all of those, and I'll listen to them with the track. This one sounded really nice by itself, but remember, you want to listen in context with the track too. This one, it's not as powerful, but we could always compress it and kind of make it a little more powerful. And I think this one might be the winner as far as the sounds, but I'll play it with the track. No, we never belong. So I'm singing. All right, and so that might be hard for you to hear. So I'll just take the compression more. All right, so just depending on the vibe or how hard you want to go with this track, I want this a little more subtle. So I think what I'm going to do is stick with this set of kicks right here. So I'll just hold down Option, and when I click on these selected kicks, I can move these over, and it'll copy these kicks over to a new place. Over there, I'll hit Command D to duplicate a couple times. So now I've got that kick. So we're going to replace that kick. All right, so I'll just adjust the levels there a little bit. So it was coming in a little bit louder than it needed to with the compressor on there. And so now what we want to do is start adding in some other drums and percussion elements in there, so that way we can start to make it feel more like a dance track. Because right now, because of that slow bass, it feels like it's kind of rolling along, but we want to kind of feel like it. We want it to feel like it's faster. All right, so I'm going to add in a new audio track. We're going to call this Hat. We'll call this Hat Loops, because you may actually want to start working with loops when you're first starting out. If you have trouble with programming drums and stuff like that, it's okay to grab loops for the time being, just while you're starting to practice all this stuff and get used to using your software. Sometimes, so this is where loops and things like that will help you out with kind of just getting things done. So let's see what that sounds like in there.
No, we never belong. So I'm singing these songs here. No, we never belong.
All right, so we can start with that, and let's add another hi-hat track. So we can compare this with a different hi-hat sound. Let's use that as the open hat on the upbeats. Change this grid size to 1/8 notes, and select this up to the next one and just duplicate that, and then select the whole bar and duplicate that out.
No, we never belong. So I'm singing these songs here.
And the nice thing is if we can select all of these, right, and we go into this part here with the sample, we can transpose and affect all of these audio clips at the same time.
No, we never belong. So I'm singing.
So I can make it sound like it fits a little bit better with the key of the song. So we have something on the upbeats, and then what we want to do is create something that is kind of on the so like a 16th note pattern. So we have this one happening on every 8th note. So on the upbeat, so it's more of a syncopated rhythm. And then we can do is create, I'll rename this hat open hat. And then I'll hit Command T and I'll create a new track. And then I'll change my grid to 16th notes. And then we can find another hi-hat. So we'll just grab this one. That's a closed hi-hat. And then we'll duplicate that out for 16th notes. And make sure it's on the grid. All right, so that's on the grid. That's on the grid. And that's on the grid. So we want to make sure that this hi-hat is on the grid. Otherwise, it's going to get off rhythm and it's going to sound kind of weird and wonky. So then we can just duplicate that out a bunch of times. So I'm just highlighting those 4, hitting Command D until I duplicate all of those.
No, we never belong. So I'm singing these songs here.
And again, we can select all of these and we can actually consolidate them into one clip by hitting Command J. And then now we can transpose all of them.
No, we never belong. So I'm singing these songs here.
All right, and so the one thing though is it sounds very stiff. It sounds very robotic, right? So we have this groove thing that we can do here. So if you go down into clip and hit this little recycle looking button, it'll show up with this hot swap mode. And what we can do is go in here and find a quantization. And this is where we can give it some groove and some swing, depending on what we think would fit for this particular track. So we can just go with, let's try a Logic swing. And what this is going to do is it's going to add a little bit of humanization. It's going to make it feel like a person is actually playing it, because people don't play things robotically and exactly on the grid like that all the time. So this is just letting me know what the swing sounds like. So that's more straight, and this is more swung. So we want something in between there. All right, let's try that 55. So if I double click that, it's going to show up in here now inside of this. And what it's going to do is it's going to allow me to listen to this track now with the hi-hats with some swing on them before I actually commit it and before it actually moves the notes around. Which that feels like it has a little bit more groove to it. So if I go none, sounds very stiff. So I hit commit, and you'll see that it adds all these warp markers in here, and it kind of gives it a little bit of a swing. And I can do the same for these guys here. I can consolidate all this, so Command J, so that way it doesn't. Now what I can do is go back to the same groove, add that in there, and so it'll line up with these hi-hats too. And so we can maybe move this one over to the right and that one on the left. So I'm going to close some of these windows so you can see what all is going on here. We don't need this one right now. So now what we've got is we've got kicks, we've got some hi-hats and all that stuff going on. We can add in this hi-hat loop again and see if maybe this adds a little bit more rhythm to it. So if you notice, there's a little bit of a pattern going on with this hi-hat. They just threw something a little bit offbeat, and that happens a lot in like house music, especially, is it's not always just these straight notes. So if I mute these out, and we just have this. So that little note right there. All right, so we can mimic stuff like that, especially from the loops, and add those in there, and it gives it kind of a little bit more of a dancey kind of groove. And those are some of the percussion elements that you can start to add in to make things a little bit more interesting. So it's not so straight like these guys, where it's just the same thing over and over and over and over and over. Now, another thing is this sounds very dry. There's not really much going on here. So if I took this sample out, it sounds a little bit boring just because there's no reverb, there's no delays, none of that kind of stuff. And so you can add if when you're creating, it's okay to add in some reverbs and delays just to kind of get things sounding a little bit more interesting for the performance or for the production. So we can go in and add a reverb on this return here. And so now we have a little bit of a reverb, and we can add that. So if I turn up this send on this closed hi-hat or this open or this closed hi-hat or this other one, then it's going to start to add some reverb in. So we'll be able to hear that reverb. So you hear when I stop it, now we have some reverb there. All right, and so we can play around with how big we want the reverb by turning up the decay time. But too much of that can make it really muddy and just like kind of gets in the way of all the other sounds. So we want a shorter decay for these guys. Okay, so now that we have some reverbs and effects on here, we can even put it on this other loop one, and we can add this loop back in here. And this is where we can use some of those editing skills that we covered earlier, where now we can take this loop and we can maybe even change up some of the stuff that's going on in this loop. So instead of having that same thing going on over and over again, we can maybe copy this clap here, can hit Command C, and maybe paste it here on kind of an offbeat. So we can see what that sounds like. All right, so now we're making use of this. So let me turn down this hi-hat a bit. All right, and then we can take this and just duplicate that. So we can select that now that we have that clap in kind of that offbeat pattern. So it's not, so here's the downbeat, right? And so we just put it on the and of that. So the next eighth note over. That's the next 16th note over, not the next eighth note. The eighth note would be here. So we put it on the 16th note. So here's the downbeat, and then the 16th note. All right, so I can select that, and I can hit Command D, and now we have the same thing going on twice. So I want to put a little bit of reverb on that too, just to make sure that this sounds like it's in the same place as these other hi-hats that we put in there. All right, and then we can listen to that with the sample. It sounds like the kick needs a little bit of grooviness too. So one thing we can do is we can take this particular track and steal the groove from that. So if I hit Command E and we break this into its own section. So now if I want to make sure that the kicks line up with this particular sample that we're using, I'll just find that section that we're using. So this is the section that we've got going. We can hit Command J, and then you see that it just breaks it into one loop section here. And then if we hit right click and extract grooves, it'll take the groove from this particular segment of that track. So now Ableton has gone ahead and figured out what the groove of that track based on these transients that you see in here. And if I go into groove, you'll see 11 here. That's that section that we took out of the song, and we can now use that in the kicks. So if we take these kicks and we hit Command J to consolidate those, and then what we can do is go to groove 11 here and see if that makes it sound any better with the rest of the track. It doesn't sound like it made it any better to me. So let me mute out these other ones and just have the kick and the track playing at the same time without the groove being applied. So we'll just have these two going. Yeah, it sounds better without the groove. So sometimes trying to apply a groove in that way, it doesn't work out so well, but it's worth a try at least to try to kind of get things tightened up as far as the timing goes.